Good morning, everyone. Welcome to episode number 2 of Ask a Property Manager. I'm Andrew Schultz, principal broker with Own Buffalo Real Estate here in Buffalo, New York. Thanks for tuning in. We got a ton of stuff we're going to talk about today. We got three different topics we're going to try to hit today, and then we're going to bring you up to speed on what's going on behind the scenes, and then we'll talk a little bit about next week. So let's jump right in. I wanted to start this week talking a little bit about taxes because it is tax time. It's that time of the year. It's nobody's favorite time of year, but it's something that we all have to deal with as property owners, as property managers, as real estate professionals. And there's a few things that you have to make sure that you do in the month of January in order to ensure that you're staying compliant. Today we're going to talk specifically about 1099 forms as well as the 1096 transmittal forms. And the 1099 MISC form, that's the form that you're going to send to the bulk of the people that you interact with inside your business. So like for our property management company, we have to send 1099s to our property owners showing the gross rents that they received as well as any other income such as laundry and late fees and things like that. For our vendors, we have to send out a 1099 to anyone who's received $600 or more in compensation over the course of the year. And a little bit of a pro tip for you here, make sure that you get a W-9 from your contractors up front before they do any work for you. It's a lot easier to get that information before you hand them a pile of cash as opposed to trying to chase after them come tax time, especially if you have a job that goes sour or the contractor disappears or whatever the case may be. At least you have their tax identification number so that you can properly 1099 them, regardless of how the situation turns out with the actual vendor itself. So that's a good little pro tip. Make sure that you're staying on top of that. The other thing I would recommend, getting out of the tax realm for a little bit, make sure that you get insurance coverage showing you as an additional insured from your vendors. That's another story for another day. We'll have a whole different topic on dealing with vendors and onboarding vendors and things like that. But for now, just know that you're definitely going to want to have them fill out that W-9 when they start with you, so that you can give them your 1099 MISC form at the end of the year. And for a contractor, that 1099 MISC form is going to show the non-employee compensation for the entire amount that you paid them out. So if you paid them out for labor and materials, you'll mark that entire amount on the 1099, and then it's up to the contractor to split that out on their taxes as to what was actually materials and what was labor. And then something that I learned this last year actually, any attorney that you pay revenue to, over $600, you have to issue a 1099 to, a 1099 MISC form. So that's something that I picked up on last year when I was doing our 1099s, and I double checked with our accountant and he said, yes, that is something that is in the tax code. So you're gonna have to make sure if you do have an attorney that you've paid a sum of money to, maybe you had them file an eviction for you or something like that, you do have to 1099 them as well. For reference on this, I pulled it right off the IRS website. I'm not an accountant. Definitely speak to your accountant before you trust the advice of a stranger on the internet. But that's where the information came from, was directly from the IRS website. So it should be fairly accurate as we get into 1099 season. 1099 MISC forms need to be mailed out by January 31st. So if you're sending those to your property owners and your vendors and things like that, make sure that those are postmarked by January 31st. And then the 1096 transmittal form, which is what you have to use when you send everything to the IRS so that they receive a copy of the 1099s as well. If you're filing those paper copies, those need to be mailed by February 28. And if you're filing electronically, it's March 1st. So just double check on all that with your accountant as you're going through the process, but that might be a way that you can save a little bit of coin, is by doing the 1099s in-house, doing them yourself. One thing I do want to show you real quick, let me just jump over to our other screen here. We do have a video that was posted on our Facebook page a few weeks ago as to how to get these forms, these IRS forms, pretty much any IRS form you want, any publication on how to fill them out, any actual form, all of that can be found on the IRS website and they'll ship it to you free of cost. So if you're interested in that, there is a video over on our Facebook page. You can find out more about how to get those tax forms for free. Don't go to Staples or OfficeMax and pay $25 for 10 forms or something like that. Let the government send them to you for free if you're going to do them yourself in-house. So now that we've talked about taxes a little bit, we wanted to jump into our next section, which is going to be more specific to New York, upstate New York. If you're watching from outside of New York, this might not be quite as interesting to you, but you should definitely take note of what I'm talking about here, because these laws that have gone into place, we're going to be talking about new landlord tenant laws that went into place in New York State in the year 2019. And part of that is, part of it is so that the people here in Western New York know what the new laws are, or across the state. These apply to the entire state of New York, but there was a lot of changes for upstate New York specifically. One thing you'll notice is that these laws, once they start coming into place in states, California, New York, Washington, Oregon have really, in the last couple of years, put a strong emphasis on their landlord tenant legislation. Once you see states start to kind of jump on the bandwagon, it's a very, very quick process for other states to start adopting laws once they see that other, the first states have done it and see what the overall reactions are. So we'll jump into this here. I'm going to switch over to our desktop again so that you guys can look along with me here. This was provided to me by, I think this was provided to me at one of the landlord tenant meetups one of the landlord meetups in Western New York. Mike Lombardo is the attorney who originally penned this. I did not ask for Mike's permission to share this. Hopefully he doesn't mind. But I wanted to run through this. This is really interesting because it gives you a good indication of what the old law was followed by the new law. And there's just a few highlighted points that I wanted to talk about here. And these are all changes that went into effect in June, July of last year. And then there was a second set of changes that went into effect in October. So everything that we're talking about today is the law in New York State as of today, which is January 8th, 2020. So we'll jump into this here. The first thing that was changed was application fees and application and other fees. We used to be able to charge basically whatever we wanted to for credit and background checks, for application fees and things like that. That law has changed. We are now restricted to credit and background checks of $20 maximum. And you have to be able to justify that. So you have to be able to show a receipt if someone questions it, showing what you paid for the credit and background check. If it's under $20, you can only charge up to the amount you were charged. So it's a $20 maximum for credit and background checks combined. This is a little bit of a headache because more often than not, we're paying more than that $20 to run the credit and background checks. So it kind of leaves the property manager or the landlord holding a bill for a few dollars for every credit and background check they run, which might not seem like a big deal if it's, maybe you have one or two properties, but if you have an operation that's running at scale where you're running a bunch of applications every month, those fees can add up very, very quickly. Next thing that I wanted to talk about was the change in late fees. So late fees, we used to be able to charge, a late fee of, I think ours was $50 and $2 a day. There wasn't really a state statute that controlled what the late fees could be. That has changed. Late fees are now permitted only if the payment is received more than 5 days after the due date, and it's the lesser of $50 or 5% of the gross rent. So that's important to know. So if you have a rent that falls, into a point where 5% of the rent would be less than the $50 late fee, the maximum you can charge is that 5%. So that's a big change. That resulted in a change in our lease as well. Just because we have to stay compliant with what the new regulations are. So the late fees have changed in the state of New York. You're limited now to that $50 or maximum 5%. So that is the new law on late fees. Security deposits and advanced rent. This is one that's kind of controversial. So what we would do previously would be if we had a tenant, if we had an applicant that was a little bit more borderline. Maybe their income was right on the cusp of qualifying, just under qualifying, or maybe they had damaged credit or something like that. A lot of times what we would do would be a conditional approval of their rental application, but they would have to pay first, last, and security, or first and a double security deposit, or something along those lines to help offset the risk associated with that application. So that has been completely eliminated in the new laws. So the advances and deposits cannot equal more than 1 month of rent total, is my understanding. So if you have a rent of $850 and your security deposit is $850, that's the maximum you can collect. There's no more, double deposit, so you would be bringing in $1,700. There's no more, first, last, and security. Those have all been eliminated. So the maximum you can charge at move-in now is your rent and your late fee. I'm sorry, your rent and your 1 month's rent security deposit. And there's quite a bit more that goes along in that section. If you're interested in receiving a copy of this, by the way, I can make this available. Just shoot us a message on Facebook, facebook.com/Buffalo Foreclosed Homes. I would be glad to email this over to you. Notice of rent increase or non-renewal of tenancy has changed. So it used to be there was not really a requirement in place. There was no limit as to the amount that a landlord can up the rent in any given time. The other thing was if you wanted to terminate a tenancy, it was usually a 30-day notice if they were outside of their lease. That has definitely changed. So now if you want to increase the rent 5% or more, or you don't intend to renew the tenancy, you have to provide more advance notice to the tenant. So this is if you're looking, again, 5% or greater rent increase, or if you are looking to just not renew the tenant, you've decided you want to move you want the tenant to move out for whatever reason. The timelines for this have changed. So if the tenant has lived in the property or has a lease of less than 1 year, you have to give them a 30-day notice to terminate the tenancy. If they're on a lease term of 1 to 2 years, or they've lived in the home for 1 to 2 years, you have to provide a 60-day notice. And then if the tenant has lived in the property for 2 or more years, you have to provide a 90-day notice. So that's definitely a longer timeline than what we were dealing with previously for almost all tenants. So that's, it's 30 days for under 1 year. 1 to 2 years tenancy is 60 days, and then over 2 years tenancy is 90 days. So that's definitely a change from our 30 days that we were able to use previously. So let's see. Here we have terminating a residential month-to-month tenancy. If the landlord is terminating it, it was a 1 month, 30-day, and now it's available only to the tenant on a month-to-month tenancy. Let me just double check. I want to make sure I'm reading that right. So if you're terminating a residential month-to-month tenancy, the landlord or the tenant used to be able to terminate with a 30-day notice, and now it's available only to the tenant to terminate on a 30-day notice. So now we're going to talk a little bit more about the actual eviction process and what's changed there. So there's been some pretty substantial changes to the eviction process in the state of New York as a result of this new legislation, which has led to a lot longer timelines. And it can really put a real damper on a landlord if they have a tenant that's living in a property while they're still paying a mortgage and not receiving rent. It can really affect a small-time landlord very quickly. So the first thing I want to talk about is the amount that you can collect at the court. It used to be that we could get our back rent as well as any late fees or damages, attorney's fees and things like that. All of that would be considered when we were going before the judge for a summary proceeding. That has now been limited to just the base rent. So all of your late fees, all of your damage fees, any attorney's fees and things like that, none of that's able to be collected at the time of eviction in that court. All they're going to be able to issue a summary proceeding for is the actual base rent only. So that's something to note. And again, the attorney's fees, those are both covered right here. Talks about the amount that can be collected as well as the attorney's fees. And it's very clear landlord cannot recover attorney's fees at any point in this proceeding. We'll talk a little bit about the notice required. So it used to be that we would issue in New York State, if you had a tenant that was behind on rent, you would issue a 3-day pay or quit notice. After the 3 days had elapsed, at that point you could go to the courthouse and file for your eviction proceeding. So that process has changed. You now have to issue 2 different notices in the state of New York. The first notice is a 14-day pay or quit notice. That notifies the tenant that they are behind in rent, lets them know how much they're behind in rent. It's basically the replacement to the 3-day notice. It's a very similar form. New York State provides these for free, available on their website. You can download a form fill PDF of this. And now it's a 14-day notice as opposed to a 3-day notice when notifying a tenant that they are behind in rent. You also have to issue a 5-day notice which can run, congruently with the 14-day notice, and that lets the tenant know that you do have intent of pursuing the issue in court if they fail to pay. If at any time between the time that you issue, basically between the time the rent's due and the time the tenant is physically removed from the property by the sheriff's department or the marshal, if they come to you and have payment of the amount due, the base rent that's due, you have to accept that, and that also terminates the tenancy. So that is something that's worth knowing. The landlord is required to accept payment if the full rent is tendered before the hearing. Or actually, the way it was explained to me was not even up until the hearing. It's right up until they show up to do the removal from the property. If the tenant is able to pay that base rent in full, that does cancel the eviction proceeding, and you're basically back to square one. So that is something to know. You are required to accept rent payments in full. If it's for the total of the base rent, that's worth noting. Once you file your petition, so keep in mind you now have there's a 5-day grace period in the state of New York where the tenant can pay rent, and then your late fee would kick in on that, after that 5-day. When you issue your 14-day notice and your 5-day, those can run at the same time. So you're talking about being later in the month, around the 20th of the month, before you can go to the courthouse now and file for your eviction. And the timelines on that have changed now as well. So it used to be that the petition could be served, let me see here, one second here, there it is, between 5 and 12 days. So it used to be that there had to be 5 to 12 days between the date that the paperwork was served to the tenant and the actual court date. That has been elongated out. That is now between 10 and 17 days. So you're not going to get to court. When you go to the courthouse to file for your eviction, you're not going to get a court date within that 5 to 12 day time frame. It's now going to be that 10 to 17 days before you're going to get your court date. Not really ideal. Again, it just kind of stretches the timeline out. Not a real ideal situation. When you go into court, either side can request an adjournment one time. Previously, the statute said that this adjournment would be less than 10 days, less than or equal to 10 days. That adjournment now has to be at least 14 days. So that's a change in the statute. And then the actual warrant for the removal will say that you've gone all the way through the eviction process. The judge has heard the case and has granted you the eviction. The warrant to have the tenant physically removed from the property, that used to be issued with a 72-hour notice, letting the tenant know exactly what day and time they were going to be out to physically remove them. That is now 14 days as well. So you can see where these timelines have really, stretched out as part of these new laws. The eviction process, we're actually in the process of going through some of our first evictions since these new laws have gone into place. What used to be a process that would take us on a good month 30 days, on a bad month 45 days to complete, we're now looking at a process that's more like 45 to 60, possibly as long as 75 to 90 days. It just depends on how long it takes to get everything through the court and whatever adjournments go through and all the other things that go into it. The last point that I wanted to cover on this is if the tenant has an extreme hardship as part of the eviction proceeding, they can request a stay on the proceeding. And originally this applied only to New York City. Now this applies statewide. The court can issue a stay of the issuance of warrant for up to 1 full year. Up to 1 full year they can apply that stay. You do have the ability to attempt to prove, as the landlord, you have the ability to attempt to prove that the tenant is, the conduct of the tenant is objectionable and that there's a reason that they can't stay or anything like that. But the reasons that the tenant can request that hardship include serious illness, a child's enrollment in a local school, or other extenuating circumstances affecting the ability to relocate or maintain quality of life. This one kind of rolls over onto the bottom of this page here, so we'll highlight that for you as well. So I haven't seen this applied yet, at least in Western New York. I'm kind of hoping that we don't see a lot of this get applied in Western New York, but it is one of those things that you have to be aware of. So there are a lot more concerns now when going to court on an eviction. So as you can see, there's quite a bit of information contained in here. I will mention the fact, guys, I'm not an attorney, just like I'm not an accountant. You should definitely speak to your attorney before you make any decisions with regards to a tenancy or something along those lines. Talk to your professional team always. Your best bet as a landlord is always going to be talk to your professional team, make sure that you're getting the best possible advice, and then make a sound decision based on that advice. So that's what we have there. Quite a bit of information on those new landlord tenant laws. Hopefully you guys got some value out of that. That is a crazy situation. We're still kind of working our way through it. I've now been to several different, networking meetings. As a matter of fact, one was put on by one of the local judges, and even he said that the law is the law, but it's not necessarily being applied the same way across the state. There's still a lot of questions that are being ironed out. I believe there's actually a lawsuit that's either pending or has been filed at this point that a lot of the lobbyists, the landlord lobbyists, are in the process of filing to try to get some of these laws rewritten such that they're clarified, and some of them possibly reduced or eliminated altogether. So stay tuned for that. We'll obviously keep you informed as to what's going on here in the great state of New York. And like I said, if you're not in the Buffalo market, if you're not in the New York State market, stay tuned anyway, because once you see some of these states start putting laws like this in place, more and more states are going to start putting in very similar laws. So while it might only impact a few states right now, New York being one of them, mark my word, this will be a concern that's going to spread across the country when it comes to these new landlord tenant laws, how they're going to be written and how they're going to be enforced. So worth noting. I wanted to pull one question today. Obviously, we get a bunch of questions about tax stuff and about the new landlord tenant laws, but I did want to pull one more question as well. This was pulled from the Rent Prep for Landlords Facebook group, and I apologize, I have to turn so that I can read this because it's on my second screen. So this was someone who had posted this question in the Rent Prep for Landlords Facebook group. I grabbed it this morning, and I just wanted to go through this and offer a little bit of input. 5 years ago, I signed a couple. I'm going to assume that means to a lease, but they've since broken up and she's moved out. They are still together, but working on their relationship. He's adamant he does not want to move out. She's been gone since April 2019, and they've since had a second baby. A little bit of background information. We don't really need all that. He's now asked that if her brother be allowed to stay with him temporarily because of a roommate situation gone bad. Says it will only be for a couple of months. I want to draft a short-term, month-by-month type of lease, but my husband does not think it will be necessary. I think a change of address and some furniture could turn into something bigger than we want to deal with. Thoughts? So there's a few red flags here. We won't jump into all of them. I just want to address the main question here, which is, what do you do when you have somebody who wants to move into an apartment that is not on the original lease? So the question doesn't really indicate whether or not the tenants are currently on a lease or if they're month to month. But what I would do in this instance would be screen the brother to make sure that he meets your qualification standards, using whatever standards you're allowed to operate under in your state. I'm not sure what state this was out of. Run a background check, run a credit check, verify income, speak to previous landlords if you're able to, do your due diligence on them before you just let them move into the place. At that point, what I would do would be if the existing tenants, if the boyfriend and girlfriend are on a lease together, which I'm not sure what the current lease situation is, if they're on a lease together and you want to add the brother on as an additional tenant, you could just add him onto the existing lease. If there's no lease in place and it's just a verbal or a month-to-month type of a thing, I would put some kind of a lease in place that clearly indicates who the responsible parties are, who's on the lease, things of that nature, just to make sure it's crystal clear who the actual tenants are of the lease. So just make sure that you're getting covered. Definitely don't just let this person move in. Make sure that you're doing your due diligence and covering everything. Cover your bases, because at the end of the day, if something goes sour, look, this guy already had one bad roommate situation. I'm not saying he's going to move in and cause problems for you, but it is something you should be aware of. Cover your bases to make sure that you have the information you need up front. It's a lot easier. Going back to the conversation we were having earlier about contractors and getting their W-9 up front, it's a lot easier to get information on the front end than on the back end when everybody has a reason to withhold or a reason to not respond or something like that. So just make sure that you're covering your bases up front. So guys, I want to just wrap up here a little bit. Before we do wrap up, I wanted to show you a couple new things that we have going on in our little world, and then we'll talk a little bit about our next episode. First thing I wanted to mention is that we have a new foreclosure listing that just hit the market this week. So this property is in Kenmore, New York. This is a value add type property. It needs quite a bit of work. Definitely needs a roof. The interior is going to need some rehab here. Is it going to let me click photos? There we go. We'll go through a couple of the photos here just so you can get an idea. We do have a walkthrough video of this that's going to be posting sometime in the next day or so as well. And all of this information can be found on our Facebook page, facebook.com/Buffalo Foreclosed Homes. This is a 2-unit, so it's 2 bedrooms downstairs. It's 1 bedroom upstairs. You do need to do quite a bit of work here. You're going to be doing 2 kitchens. You're going to be doing 2 bathrooms. But it is a foreclosure. It is on the market now. This is the address is 141 Eisman in Kenmore, and that property is listed at, I believe, $94,900 currently. So if you have any interest on that, feel free to reach out to us, facebook.com/Buffalo Foreclosed Homes. We'll jump back to this. Let's see, what else do we need to cover? Yes, the Own Buffalo website. The interesting thing about having just launched our company is that everything is very, very fresh. This is our current website at ownbuffalo.com. I understand that it's not the greatest. We are actually in the process of redeveloping an all-new website, but for the time being, we needed to get a placeholder in here. I think it's bad business to just have no website, so I wanted to at least get a placeholder up here. Right now, ownbuffalo.com, you can catch a link to our Facebook page. You can catch a link to our YouTube page. Guys, if you really want to help me out, if you want to get me a belated Christmas gift, the best thing you could do for me right now is head over to YouTube and hit that subscribe button for me. We need to get up to 100 subscribers before we can claim our custom URL, youtube.com/ownbuffalo. Right now, we've got this big, nasty, ugly one up here. We'd like to get rid of that, make it nice and easy for people to find our content. So please, if you can, shoot over to YouTube, give us a quick subscription. I really appreciate you doing that for us. You'll also be able to find all of our video content that finds its way onto Facebook will find its way onto YouTube, but there's also stuff that goes on YouTube that never finds its way onto Facebook. So definitely check out both platforms. One thing I did want to mention, if you want to submit a question for Ask a Property Manager, you can do that right here at ownbuffalo.com, or you can go to our Facebook page and submit it through there. The other thing I wanted to mention is I do offer free 30-minute consultations as part of the Ask a Property Manager program. If you have a question that you need an answer to, maybe it's something that's a little bit longer, or something that you want to be more private about, you don't want it to be publicized on the actual Ask a Property Manager program, you can request a free 30-minute consultation from me. I book a couple of these a week, and basically what we do is we give you the ability, see we have one available for tomorrow at 4:30, and I think I have next week scheduled as well. I offer 2 of these a week. There we go. And there's the time slots for next week. So I offer 2 of these a week. It's a free 30-minute consultation. It's not my way of trying to pitch you something. It's not my way of trying to sell you something. It's literally just a way for you to call, get a little bit of advice, ask a question from somebody who's been through this business, been doing this now for 10 years. My office manager, Kristen, has been in the business at least that long as well. A lot of experience in our office, and if we can do something to help you out, we'll be glad to do it. So feel free to take advantage of those. You can find the link to get to this off of our website at ownbuffalo.com. You'll just click the button, free 30-minute consultation, and it'll take you right over. So we'll switch back over to this, get you off of the desktop. Next episode will be next Wednesday, January 15th at 10 a.m. Eastern. We'll be answering some more questions. If you guys have questions, please feel free to submit them. That's how we love to operate this program, is off of the live questions that people send us. We're also going to be talking a little bit more about the new brokerage, about Own Buffalo, how this whole thing came to be, a little bit of a peek behind the scenes, the things that go into opening a brokerage, the licensing and the insurances and stuff like that. Kind of a peek behind the curtain, because I feel like this gives, a really good opportunity for us as we're building the new business to kind of share that journey with you guys as an audience. It's something that we're really excited about. 2019, we did a lot more on social media than what we had done in 2018. 2020, we want to do so much more. We want to do a lot more video. of not just bringing back Ask a Property Manager, but we want to start doing a lot of different things. We want to start showing you more of the projects that we're working on as they progress. So you'll be able to see, you know, maybe a 2-3 minute update video on what we're doing on a rehab project or something like that, and be able to watch it all the way through from beginning to end. That's the type of content you'll find over on YouTube, but not necessarily on Facebook, simply because it's a little bit longer form, and that seems to perform better over there. You can also check out, actually you can't check out our Instagram yet. We're still in the process of getting that set up, but we will have an Instagram up in the near future as well. You can find my personal Instagram, which has a ton of real estate stuff on it, as well as some food, and occasionally a cigar or two. So it's a pretty interesting follow. That's Instagram.com/Andrew Schultz Buffalo, I think is what it's listed under currently. Guys, thanks for watching. We really do appreciate it. I'm going to throw our contact info up here so that you guys have questions. You can reach out to us. Facebook.com/Buffalo Foreclosed Homes. That is the best way to reach us. We're on the Facebook page more often than not. That's probably one of the best ways to reach us. You can always call our office at 716-608-3200 or shoot me an email to hello@ownbuffalo.com. Obviously, you can go to YouTube, find our content there, or you can visit us at ownbuffalo.com. I appreciate you guys watching. As I mentioned, next episode will be January 15th, which is next Wednesday, 10 a.m. Eastern. We talked about the topics we'll be covering, and we look forward to seeing you guys then. Thanks for watching. Have a great week, and we'll see you next week.